Hello and welcome to the ACE project podcast co-founded by the European Life Clean Energy Transition Programme. ACE, or Access to Capital for Energy Communities, is a project dedicated to developing financial solutions for energy communities through the cooperative movement. I'm your host, Teodora Ghenciu, a journalist with a passion for sustainability, and today we're going to talk about how funds dedicated to energy communities can support the energy transition. And our host today is Corina Murafa, energy policy expert, member of the European Economic and Social Committee. Welcome, Corina.
Thank you, Teo.
We are both part of an energy community here in Romania, Cooperativa de Energie. But since we are addressing the general public, maybe it's better to start by explaining what exactly an energy community is and why is it so important. Communities, why are they so important for the European Commission?
Well, this form of organizing citizen interests in the energy sector is not new. It may seem new, and we have been definitely talking about it in the past couple of years quite a lot, but it's actually been around since the 70s in Europe when citizens wanted to gain back power in the energy market. And basically they pooled resources together, capital, they invested their savings in acquiring assets jointly that allowed them to produce their own energy and to cover their energy consumptions by themselves without having to rely on a supplier. And as a matter of fact, some of the first energy communities were also off-grid, so they weren't relying on a distribution system operator either. And since then, it's been a form that allowed, on the one hand, citizens to come together as communities more. We all know that we live in the century of loneliness, so finding venues and opportunities for citizens to come together as a community in a neighborhood or even without geographical boundaries, just somehow bound together by common interests is super important. But then these forms of energy communities have proven to be very instrumental from a financial and economic perspective as well. I'm a researcher as well and a university lecturer, and I've been doing research work on the economics behind energy communities, and it turns out that energy communities throughout Europe have led to energy savings and to economic savings. The bill of people that are in an energy community, especially in those markets where energy communities are developed, is 62% lower than the regular bill in the market. I've seen energy communities in Belgium, for instance, able to thrive and not only to survive but also to thrive in the energy crisis because they were not relying on gas, they were relying on renewable energy sources, which they were basically commonly owning, so owning in common. That's the whole principle of energy communities, shared ownership of assets, and then managing those assets cooperatively and giving back the benefits to the members of the community.
So renewable energy is not mandatory if we want to talk about an energy community?
The European Directive on Renewable Energy gives a definition to energy communities and it focuses on renewable energy communities. So it kind of emphasizes the fact that having renewables as a production asset is the defining element of an energy community. There is another European piece of legislation which talks about citizen energy communities, which do not have to be mandatorily based on renewable sources. Now, if you look in Europe, we are talking about 4% of Europe's population which is a member of an energy community, and over 90% of those energy communities are actually renewable energy communities. It's been easier for people to pool resources together and to invest jointly in solar panels. That's the preferred technology in energy communities, or even commonly owned windmills, commonly owned district heating systems based on residual heat or based on biomass, for instance. There are some very interesting energy communities, even in our part of Europe, in the Czech Republic, which use sustainable biomass, essentially the leftovers from forestry or the leftovers from green space management in municipalities to generate their own heat.
Is it important if the members of an energy community are individuals, I don't know, CMEs, NGOs, authorities,
The European Directive on renewable energy, which gives this precise definition of energy communities, says that within an energy community there can be a wide diversity of membership, talking about either citizens or SMEs or public authorities. I guess the only actor which is sort of excluded from an energy community is a large enterprise, because a large enterprise by default has the power to become a player in the energy market, while this form of being a player in the energy market is reserved for the underprivileged actors, and the underprivileged actors are typically citizens and SMEs. Now, the fact that public authorities can also be members of an energy community is really nice, because they can come with extra resources, and I've seen this around Europe in places such as Plymouth in the UK, or some places in Germany, where the public authority actually managed to give a lot of good resources to the energy community, from office space to even actually the space for installing the equipment, because they had lots of underused space, rooftops, but also just land that they owned. But what's important when there is a public authority that's a member of the community together with citizens is that we're still talking about the democratic model of decision making and of reaping the benefits. It's not that the authority dominates the community and then just gives directions to the citizens that are by name members of the community. But no, in principle, since we're talking also about cooperative movements, the essence of the cooperative movement is one member, one vote. So even if you have
even if you are an authority or a business or whatever.
Mr. Smith has the same voting powers as Mayor Jones, who's basically the leader of the municipality.
So what about Romania? We are based here. Do we have a specific context why the development of energy communities is so important?
Well, it's clear that we're a member of the European Union, so it's clear that we need to follow European legislation. It means that we need to have a favorable legislative environment for the creation of energy communities, because that's what the European Renewable Energy Directive says. It says that governments need to create a favorable framework for the creation of energy communities. So obviously, that's what our authorities need to be doing. Now, the good news is that our government has transposed the European legislation. We have laws in place that define what an energy community is and does, and the rights of its members and the obligations and so on. But whenever it comes to public policy, primary law is not enough. You need to have secondary legislation, tertiary legislation, so all these kind of nitty-gritty rules and regulations that define the rules of the game. And in Romania, we don't have them yet. So although in theory, any group of citizens could form an energy community here in Romania, it would be hard for them to go to the trade registry and register as such, because there's no secondary legislation which really defines this process of, registration, what kind of legal form you can take, how are you recognized as an energy community, and so on and so forth. So the movement is early stage in Romania. We have Cooperativa de Energie, which de facto acts as an energy community, although it's quite interesting that it got in place despite the fact that back when it started, there was not even a framework here in Romania. So actually they follow the European legislation directly in order to establish themselves from a legal perspective. But at the same time, there's a couple of other movements that have come up lately. One of them, for instance, is supporting communities in multi-story buildings, in multi-apartment buildings, to install solar panels on their rooftops and to be able to reap the benefits of this collective production of energy. And then there are almost 20 others early stage initiatives where basically it's either public authorities or residential communities in new villages or new residential developments that are kind of like doing the numbers now, crunching the feasibility of what it would take for them to become an energy community. There's even a village in Romania, for instance, where the mayor has supported, and his team, they supported almost a quarter of the village to install solar panels on their rooftops, and now they're struggling hard to kind of make sure that the energy which is produced by these people that have solar PV installed on their rooftops gets consumed by the people in the village that do not have solar PV installed yet. So there's a lot of willingness to develop this model, but de facto we're definitely at an earlier stage than other places in Europe.
So the main obstacle would be this, that we don't have secondary legislation.
Exactly. Even I would say even the primary legislation is too broad to be able to really create a fertile fertile ground for the creation of communities. But it's there. The good news is that our government has started to work quite hard on making the legislation more sharp and really creating this enabling framework. And it's interesting also that the Commission and European institutions in general have been able to pull together resources, good practices, and to showcase what it really means to create this favorable framework. And there's now a great web resource called the Energy Communities Repository, where you actually can see what's been done in Spain. How have energy communities been incentivized in Austria? Oh, they got this little discount in the distribution tariff, which helped them become or they have this preferential access to financing, or they have this startup capital fund which they can access, because essentially you cannot expect an energy community made out of regular citizens to compete on a level playing field in the energy market with players that have been around for decades, that have access to capital, to know-how, to resources. So we need to give them this little nudge, little support to be able to function.
And you are already pointing the sensitive notion, financing, always a challenge, including for energy communities. What kind of financial support do energy communities receive in Europe?
There's a bunch of support that they receive. I think almost all European countries that have transposed the directive, which is actually all European countries, one way or another, they're financing energy communities. And it's either through capital funding. So basically, let's say that in order to create an energy community, I need 100,000 euros as capital in order to buy the equipment and to start operating. And then there's the government, which gives me half of that money. And then the rest I need to fundraise from my members, or I need to fundraise from a bank, or get a bank loan, or get some other type of investor to back me up. But typically the government covers some capital funding. It's quite interesting that through the Repower EU, this kind of big legislative package, this big investment package that came after the energy crisis that followed the Russian invasion of Ukraine, many member states, and I think the most notable ones are Spain and Greece, decided to dedicate a big portion of the funding that they have for energy communities for startup capital for energy communities, essentially. Many times non-repayable capital, so grants, but very often also repayable capital. So, I'm just giving a preferential loan to an energy community that they are able to pay back in a longer period of time than a private actor would do, or maybe they have a very low interest rate or no interest rate. And there are also member states such as Germany and Austria that are providing other types of financial support, or Ireland for that matter, which is to finance not capital expenditures, but operational expenditures. So I'm giving some type of a subsidy throughout the whole life of the project to finance their operations. Or I'm even giving them, for instance, there are countries which are incentivizing renewable energy through an auction system. And then what they're saying is that a quarter or a third or whatever much of an auction round is reserved for energy communities, so they don't have to compete with market players. So there's a bunch of mechanisms through which this can be done, because the energy markets are so complex and so different from member state to member state that it's not a copy-paste thing that you can do. As a country, you need to define exactly what type of favorable framework you want to create. There are countries which, for instance, are not offering startup capital or capital funding, but they're excluding energy communities from paying the distribution tariff, which means that de facto they have 30% lower costs throughout their whole life than other players. So obviously, then you are able to create benefits for your members if your costs are just much lower than a regular energy supplier.
So which one of this would be also available for Romania? Or do we already have a strategy like that?
In Romania, what has worked with Cooperativa de Energie at the moment is to, for instance, to actually have community financing, because Cooperativa de Energie was funded and founded through the capital of its founding members, and then through a collective fundraising effort which emerged, and that's been the fact in many places in Europe. If you look at community energy in the Netherlands, in Germany, it's really been community driven from a financial perspective as well. You know, people having savings at home and then chiming in a little bit of their savings to the common project. So that's how most of the capital was fundraised. And then for the financing needs that were left, the community was able to get a bank loan because they were already showing, for instance, to the bank, hey, you know, I already have 60% of my capital covered through my members. Give me the rest of the 40% and I'm able to kick off this business. And I do think that it is important to put your money where your mouth is. So basically, community energy needs to be financed essentially also through the capital that members have. That, you know, and if you take a look at Romania, we're actually not such a poor country as it might seem at first hand. There are savings, there's an incredible amount of money in people's bank deposits, and in a bank you're getting, you know, 2, 3, 5% interest. Inflation is 8-10%, so you're paying actually the bank for those savings. How about putting those savings in a community energy project, which, if you look at the financials behind, makes sound business case? That's something that I've been talking about a lot. As a researcher, I've managed to crunch a little bit the numbers based on real consumption data, based on real price data from the markets. And for instance, if you are a multi-story building, a multi-family building of 60 apartments in Bucharest, with an investment of just 300 euros per member, per citizen in that community, you are able to install enough equipment that covers the consumptions of all the members and of all the common consumptions in the building, and the payback time is between 1.5 and 2.5 years, which means that after 2.5 years, you are getting net benefits. You're already recovering your investment. So what I'm saying, you know, for an investor to look into a project which has a payback time of 2.5 years, that's almost incredible. Like, I mean, unless you are an IT unicorn, it's typically payback times are much higher than that. So there's good ground for private capital to be mobilized also towards community energy in Romania as well.
So we have the money, but maybe we need more awareness.
This legislative framework that kind of really nails it down, who can be an energy community. Because what happened, and you know, I don't want to complain, but what happened essentially is that our authorities translated the European directive. Now, a directive is a piece of European legislation which is very broad, and then the member state needs to extract elements from that piece of legislation to adapt it, to contextualize it. Exactly. Well, our government didn't have the capacity to do that, so they just translated the European directive, which means that our current legislation is very, very broad, and there are a lot of practical obstacles that you come across if you decide to literally implement what's written in that law.
Because it's not very specific. You talked about government, but what about local authorities? Can they also support financially the creation of an energy community?
They could, and in practice they have in many places in the world and in Europe in general. What happens in Romania with public authorities, several things. So on the one hand, public authorities themselves have been used to getting free money. EU funds, non-reimbursable EU funds, have perverted somehow the risk appetite and just the sound business acumen of everyone in the market, including public authorities. As a public authority, you need to have a balanced budget. You need to kind of even have a surplus for investments through the taxes that you're levying from your citizens and from the businesses on your territory. But guess what? Over the past 20 years, public authorities in Romania have been used to getting non-reimbursable grants from EU funds primarily. So now very few of them use their own funds to support community things in general, or even to support public investments. They are trying, for instance, to build hospitals with European money. They're trying to build infrastructure with European money because they don't have sound business management in place, which they could have, because if you look at some cities in Romania, they're more prosperous than many other places in Europe, and still the administrations of those cities are scraping from year to year and are just waiting for this free money. So I think they could, but the appetite for doing that is very low because they're used to just getting this free European money. Now, there's another issue with public authorities in Romania, and not only in Romania, which is that we have a very strict framework for accessing loans, because we need to be very careful with keeping a balanced budget and so on. So including this EU framework is, in my opinion, a little bit too restrictive for authorities to be able to, of course, borrow money in order to finance investments.
But maybe it doesn't have to be a loan. Maybe like an investment. Or
Exactly. For instance, if you look at, there are some cities in Romania that have already started to do participatory budgeting. So technically there could be a group of citizens coming to a city in Romania, like Brașov, for instance, who has participatory budgeting, and saying, please finance a community, an energy community here in our city. The problem is that energy is such an abstract notion that people do not fall in love with it, with such an abstract concept. But they go to a public authority and they're like, please invest in a park, please invest in a new kindergarten. Although, at the end of the day, a park is never a business, so it never pays off. Well, an energy community is a business, so in a couple of years we are expecting paybacks from that business, or at least we're expecting zero costs for the energy that we consume, which is still a huge benefit. But
yes,
people,
but this needs time to understand this concept. Okay, so local authority could be a solution for financing,
or at least they could do something else. And I know that in Romania they want to do it, but again, it's the whole legislative obstacle. So I know that in Romania, and I know this for a fact because I've been talking to mayors and so on, the schools are owned by the city hall. So the school building is owned by the city hall, which means that the city hall can technically do anything with that building. So now they're just wondering, for instance, if they could give as an in-kind support to an energy community the rooftop of the school, so that the community could install solar panels there, which is a good benefit to begin with, because as a group of citizens, where would you get in the middle of the city free land to install solar PV? The rooftop of a school is a good idea, is a great idea. But public authorities who do want to do this, even in Bucharest, they're wondering if the law on public finance allows them to do that, because they fear that if they do that, then the audit court would come and say that you've given benefit to a private entity, so you've discriminated against other private entities.
A school is like a public entity, not really
right,
a
but
private,
then the community, the energy community that would own those assets, they're a private entities. So it's even absurd that even if the municipality is a member of that energy community, because it's a new legal vehicle, it's a new legal entity, they're actually quite reluctant to even give that in-kind support, so that they wouldn't
because
have the court of audit consider that it's exactly. So this is a very practical example of where the secondary legislation should come in and should say energy communities can be supported by public authorities by this and that and that. And concessions, the kind of concession of land, concession of rooftops, etc., is a brilliant way of support that public authorities can offer, and it would not cost them anything.
Okay, until this will be hopefully clarified, besides government and local authorities and members, fortunately, there are these new alternatives for communities to get external financing they need and succeed. And these new alternatives are called CEFs, Community Energy Financing Scheme, that funds community-based energy transition project. How does it work?
The scheme works, and it works in countries which are more advanced than Romania, where energy communities have been around for decades. I've seen this scheme work in France, for instance, also in Germany, and that basically entails to pool the resources, the financial resources of citizens or of businesses, to create an investment fund, and then that fund to kind of go back and finance energy communities that are founded and operated by citizens. So this funding scheme is essentially just a vehicle of pooling resources from the people that have resources to invest in a new project. It's finance, but it's cooperative finance, because I'm not just getting one investor to fund the project, but I'm getting thousands of investors to crowd invest in an energy community project. And then, of course, to be able to do that, you need legislative framework, you need investor maturity, etc., etc.
But the crowd, the people that form the crowd, don't have to be members in the community.
Not necessarily. Like, I have some savings. I do not want to leave them in a bank deposit because the interest rates are de facto negative. So I crowd invest in this platform. If you look at crowd investment in general in Europe, it's been used to fund a gazillion of elements and of projects with payback times. Crowd investment has been very slow to pick up in Romania because financial instruments in Romania are underdeveloped in general, having to do with what I just mentioned earlier, the fact that we've been used to grants and non-reimbursable finance to begin with. So we're very risk adverse. Again, if you look at the ratio between investment and bank deposits, you're going to see that Romanians are very conservative when it comes to their private investments. But the good news is that this is starting to change. So, for instance, crowd investment has started to function in Romania, not for community energy, for tech projects, but crowd investment has started to work for the past 5 years in Romania through a very interesting model of a crowd investment fund.
Okay, so we don't have this kind of scheme in Romania. It exists in Europe, in France, in Netherlands, I think. What are the benefits for the participants?
For those that are investing, there's a clear financial benefit in the form of return on investment. And for the community project, it's a clear form of access to capital when, for instance, bank loans are too expensive or you don't have the collateral, for instance, to get a bank loan. Because if you're a startup in general, let alone an energy startup, you don't have collateral to go to a bank with and to say, give me a loan because I can guarantee for that loan with this building or those assets. You don't have the assets yet. So it's really difficult to get such a loan. But again, the whole finance sector needs to speed up and to kind of open their eyes wide to these forms of businesses and be a little bit less risk adverse and invest in this.
But why? Besides the money, besides the return of investment, I don't know, the social, the economic impact.
Obviously, if you look at energy communities, literature says, and when I say literature, I'm referring to studies that were done across thousands of energy communities in Europe. Not science fiction, exactly. They point to different forms of benefits in that community. One of them is increased cohesion, increased community interactions, and for instance, there's even there's research which shows that once a community forms an energy community and they start, for instance, to have some solar panels in common and then to consume from those solar panels which they own jointly, then they start to innovate and to create other forms of community businesses. For instance, a scheme for charging electric vehicles. Why would I, as a member of a community of, let's say, a residential neighborhood, why would I charge my car in a charging station which is owned by a third party when I can charge my car in a charging station which is co-owned by myself and by hundreds or tens of other neighbors that I have, right? It's like I'm co-owning my own business. So that's really something that creates more ownership from people, even more care, I would say, with those assets. And the spread of innovation is a proven benefit. The increased social cohesion is a proven benefit. But if you just take a look at the fundamentals, so the technical and economic fundamentals, there's clear benefits there as well. The grid is better balanced through energy communities than through individual prosumers. The economic benefits are higher over 20 years periods of forecast if you have a community energy type of business than if you have individual prosumers.
It sounds very logical, but yet we're not there yet. So how can we convince people, communities to get involved, not just in an energy community, but also to use this kind of financial support, this kind of scheme?
Well, I mean,
besides explaining in a podcast,
no, obviously, I mean,
benefits.
It's a little bit of a chicken and an egg problem, because on the one hand, you have the stakeholders that can create these favorable conditions and this favorable framework, like the government or even the banks, right? Any bank can create an investment vehicles for energy communities. Nothing prevents them from doing that. On the contrary, they now are obliged to have green investment as part of their portfolios. No one has been putting together a scheme for funding energy communities. No commercial bank in Romania. So on the one hand, the decision makers in the banks need to learn about the model, need to be sensitized to using it and to start using it. Decision makers as well. But then all these decision makers, even they're private or public, they're saying, oh yeah, we understand, we could do that, but there's no citizen demands for it. So like, why would I allow my people to spend half a year developing the scheme, developing the system, writing the law, passing the law, and even in a bank, I mean, a decision-making process to create a new financial instrument, it takes probably a year at least. So then, why would I invest those resources when I don't expect demand?
So it's a circle.
It's a circle. Citizens also need to show demand to, like, for instance, the study that I authored recently this year, it's quite interesting because we surfaced around 22 communities in Romania that are fairly advanced or even mid-stage in creating an energy community. And then I asked them, did you do any advocacy efforts, lobbying efforts? Did you go to authorities to tell them about your idea and to convince them to give you some type of support? And then they said, no, we didn't do that. We don't have the know-how, we don't have the capacity, we don't trust to knock on the doors of governments or of banks, etc., etc. So it's even the people that have started to develop these ideas, they do not trust the system, and by system I mean both authorities and banks and financial institutions, to be persistent and to lobby for their idea.
So let's say we break the circle in multiple places and we somehow start the process. What about scaling community energies through CEFs?
This will happen for sure. The moment I'm optimistic, because the moment we will be able to finalize this legislative framework, and the government is working on this. We have a new energy and climate action plan that we're putting in place and sealing these days. We have a new energy strategy, and all of these documents refer to energy communities, and there is a working group at the level of the ministry which is now which involves lots of other external stakeholders as well. So it's not just the ministry by its own doing something and writing something for the market, but it's also the ministry in cooperation with citizens, with energy communities, with experts that are co-writing this legislation for energy communities in Romania. So I'm trusting that once this process is finalized, probably by the end of this year, there will be a very clear framework for energy communities to exist in Romania. And then obviously financial actors, including crowd investment vehicles, will have the feeling of this opportunity which is created, and then sort of raise the capital that's needed for this kind of emerging business.
And maybe as a conclusion for everyone listening or watching, if they got the idea, they're into it, they want to get involved maybe in creating their own community, or maybe they are an authority or a business or any kind of entity, what's the first step? What should they do?
Well, the first step is to get a team together, ideally people with different skills, some with communication skills, some with business skills, some with financial skills, some with legal skills, and come up with a concept. How do we want this community to look like? Who do we want to have as members? How much energy do we want to produce? What are our consumptions? So you need to have some tech people as well to kind of determine what's the feasible system that you need to have in your community in order to cover your needs and to also have some type of surplus. How much rooftop surface do you need if you want to install solar PV? Or how much land do you need if you want to use some other type of energy? Do you want to cover just your electricity consumption? Do you want to also cover your heating needs or your cooling needs?
So a little documentation.
So you need to do kind of a pre-feasibility study. And that's something that I know for sure will exist as support for communities that want to start these models. There will be support from European Commission, but also probably from private players in Romania for at least the feasibility studies on these energy community models. And then once you have a feasibility study done, or even a pre-feasibility study done, a concept and so on, you need to start fundraising. First, fundraise from your members, and like if you have 300 members, each member chiming in 100 euros, that's already a brilliant startup capital for installing at least a number of kilowatts that will help you kick it off. And then fundraise also from institutional investors, from banks, from non-financial banking institutions. We do have social finance in Romania, which means essentially financial players that want to invest in projects that also have social return, social or environmental return. So, once I have an idea, I would go to a bank which has a social finance department, and there are a couple in Romania which do have it. I would go to non-banking financial institutions which have a social component, and there are a couple, and present my idea, get feedback on it. It's like any other business. That's what you do. You have the business idea, you turn it into a business plan, and then you start raising funds for it. It's nothing more, nothing different than that. And keep an eye also on the kind of support that's available at European Union level, because the Commission is really interested in, and us as well in the European Economic and Social Committee, we are advocating strongly for citizen energy in all its shapes and forms, including energy communities. So I do expect every year to have at least different types of opportunities coming from European institutions, whether it's technical assistance for free that I can get in order to have that feasibility study done by professionals for me in case I cannot do it by myself, or whether it's startup capital. I do expect, and I know that this opportunity has been around in Romania for villages, for instance. Romanian villages were able to ask for technical assistance from the Commission to have their energy community at the village level defined and measured and tailor-made, etc., etc. Now, the interest wasn't there, but I do hope that in the future, with podcasts such as this one and other communication efforts, there will be more players in Romania taking advantage of the benefits that are and of the opportunities around shaping an energy community which are coming from European institutions.
I do have one last question. I thought that was, but this is my last question. Why this effort and this fuzz? Is energy a right?
Oh, that's a whole different topic. Let's
let's
open a new podcast. Yeah, exactly. Now, my personal belief is that we do need to have in place a right to energy, just as we have the right to education, just as we have the right to non-discrimination. There needs to be in place at European Union level a right to energy, because without energy we cannot function as humans and as citizens. Now, this right to energy isn't in place at the moment. There is a coalition of NGOs and advocacy organizations that are lobbying for this. I don't know if it's going to come sooner or later, but some type of right to energy has already emerged, in my opinion, when governments all over Europe responded to the Russian invasion by essentially safeguarding all their citizens from the crisis, from this completely abnormal prices that were on the market, by different types of mechanisms and instruments that left no one behind. So in this way, I could say that governments indirectly already recognize that there is a right to energy of citizens in Europe. It's not formalized yet, it's not put in law yet, but we have years in front of us to lobby and advocate for that, because I personally do feel that's the next step forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Corina Murafa, energy policy expert, about the Community Energy Financing Scheme, CEFS, and how this tool contributes to accelerating the transition to sustainable energy sources in communities for the benefit of us all, reducing energy costs, increasing access to reliable and clean energy, improving quality of life, and creating local jobs in the renewable energy sector. If you are interested in this topic, you can listen to the other episodes from the ACE Project podcast on Spotify. Thanks for listening, and choose green energy.